The whispers followed Zayden Tucker through the registration office. Who does he think he is? They saw his tattered shoes, his faded t-shirt, his dark skin, everything, except what mattered. They didn't see the boy who ran 5 miles before, dawn every morning, who delivered groceries on foot to support his family, who trained under moonlight with an old veteran who recognized greatness when others saw only poverty. When race officials smirked and told him to get out of the way, assuming he was part of the cleanup crew, they had no idea they were speaking to the fastest runner in the city. Their mistake. By the time Bryce Whitman and his prep school teammates realized what was happening, Zaden would already be sipping water at the finish line, redefining what it means to belong. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed. The sun hadn't even peeked over the horizon when Zayden Tucker slipped out of the apartment, careful not to let the door creak. His mother's soft snores from the living room couch told him she'd finally crashed after her double shift. Moving like a shadow, he eased down the stairwell of their building, avoiding the third step that always groaned. Under any weight, outside the city was still sleeping. Streetlights cast yellow pools on cracked sidewalks, and the occasional car hummed past, headlights sweeping across boarded storefronts. Zaden took a deep breath, feeling the cool morning air fill his lungs. He looked down at his sneakers. Once white, now gray with age, the soles worn thin from miles of pavement. Some days he ran barefoot, just to save what little tread remained. Today wasn't one of those days. The forecast promised rain, and the streets would be littered with broken glass and forgotten needles. Zaden stretched his lean frame, muscles already familiar with the routine. At 14, he wasn't particularly tall, but his body had been shaped by necessity, long legs built for distance, shoulders narrow and efficient. His dark skin disappeared against the pre-dawn shadows as he began to jog, slowly at first, then picking up speed. The city transformed when he ran. It wasn't just dirty apartments and tired faces anymore. It became a maze of possibilities, of shortcuts and straightaways. Alleyways became sprint tracks, staircases became strength training, fire escapes became overhead obstacles. 5 miles. Later, Zaden reached his destination, a small clearing at the edge of the city park that overlooked the eastern horizon. Breathing steadily, he pulled a battered stopwatch from his pocket. 31 minutes and 17 seconds. Not his best, but not bad considering he'd taken a longer route to avoid the corner where some dealers usually gathered. He settled on a large rock, wrapping his arms around his knees, and waited. When the first sliver of sun broke over the horizon, painting the sky in strokes of orange and pink, a small smile crossed his face. This moment, this was his. Not his mother's bosses at the diner. Not the teachers who looked through him. Just his. The sun climbed higher, and Zaden knew it was time to head back. His mother would be waking soon, and his little sister Mia would need her breakfast before school. Mia's asthma always seemed worse in the mornings. On the way home, Zaden took the route past Mr. Larkin's house, a small, well-kept bungalow that stood out on a block of neglected properties. The old man was already on his porch, as predictable as clockwork, sitting in a wooden rocking chair with his morning coffee. "Morning, young man," Mr. Larkin called out, his voice carrying the gravel of age and cigarettes long given up. His white hair contrasted sharply with his dark skin, weathered by decades of sun and hardship. Zaden nodded respectfully but kept his pace. He'd learned not to stop and chat with strangers, even ones as seemingly harmless as the old veteran. "Saw you running. Yesterday, too," Mr. Larkin continued, undeterred by Zaden's silence. "And the day before. You've got a good stride. Natural." This made Zaden pause, his curiosity briefly overcoming his caution. Nobody ever noticed his running, not like that. "You've been watching me?" Zaden asked, voice quiet with suspicion. Mr. Larkin chuckled. "Hard not to notice someone flying past my house at 5 in the morning every day. Here." He stood up slowly, joints protesting, and walked to the porch railing where a bottle of water sat. He extended it toward Zaden. "Hydration matters." Zaden hesitated, then approached cautiously and took the water. "Thanks." After a moment's consideration, he added, I'm Zaden. James Larkin, Vietnam, 2nd Battalion. The old man offered this information like it explained everything about him. Maybe it did. You training for something? Zaden shook his head. Just running. Mr. Larkin nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes just running is the purest kind there is. He settled back into his chair. See you tomorrow, Zaden. The moment lingered, just long enough to feel important before Zaden continued home. The hallways of Roosevelt High School were a different kind of racecourse, one where Zaden felt perpetually behind. He moved through crowds of students who parted unconsciously around him, as if he existed in a different current. Hey, you there! A sharp voice cut through the din. Mrs. Wilkinson, the assistant principal, beckoned to him with a stern finger. Can you clean up that spill by the water fountain? Janitor's busy with the bathrooms. Zaden stopped, his face carefully blank. I'm not on the custodial staff, Mrs. Wilkinson. I'm a student. The woman's eyes widened slightly, then narrowed. In embarrassment masked as annoyance. Well, how am I supposed to know that? You're not wearing your ID badge. She turned and walked away before he could respond. Invisible boy strikes again. Someone snickered from nearby. Zaden adjusted his backpack and kept walking. This was nothing new. In the 2 years he'd attended Roosevelt, he'd been mistaken for custodial staff 11 times. He kept count. In his morning classes, Zaden sat in the back row, taking meticulous notes. Not because he was particularly passionate about algebra or American history, but because his mother had drilled into him that education was the only way out. Your brain or your feet, she would say. Those are your tickets. Don't waste either. At lunch, he sat alone at the far end of a crowded table. No one acknowledged him, but no one asked him to move either, the perfect middle ground of invisibility, until Celeste Williams slid her tray next to his. You're Zaden, right? She asked, her voice bright against the cafeteria's dull roar. Celeste was a year ahead of him, known for her art that regularly decorated the school showcase and her outspoken presence in student government. Zaden looked up, surprise momentarily replacing his usual guardedness. Yeah, I saw you yesterday, she said, opening her chocolate milk without looking at it. After school. Zaden tensed. Yesterday he had missed the last bus home, distracted by a notice on the bulletin board about a citywide junior marathon. By the time he'd finished reading about the $25,000 scholarship prize, the buses were gone. Rather than wait an hour for the next one, he'd simply run the 3 miles home. I don't know what you're talking about, he said automatically. Celeste raised an eyebrow. You outran the number 47 bus. I was on it. We passed you at the start, but you beat us to Westover Street. She leaned in slightly. How'd you do that? Zaden shrugged. It's not that fast of a bus. The driver didn't stop at 3 scheduled. Stops because we were running late, Celeste countered, and you still beat it. She pulled out a sketchbook and flipped it open to a half-finished drawing, the unmistakable profile of Zaden in motion, his form captured with surprising accuracy. I've never seen anyone run like that, not in real life. Before Zaden could respond, the bell rang. He gathered his things quickly, uncomfortable with the attention. You should sign up, Celeste said as he stood to leave. For the marathon. I saw you looking at the flyer. Can't, Zaden replied simply. Got responsibilities. As he walked away, Celeste called after him. Everyone's got responsibilities, Zaden. Not everyone's got a gift. That evening, Zaden moved through the neighborhood. Quickly, a backpack full of groceries weighing him down. His after-school job at Murphy's Market wasn't glamorous, mostly deliveries to elderly residents who couldn't make the trip themselves, but it paid cash, and cash paid for Mia's inhalers. When he arrived home, his mother was already preparing to leave for her night shift. Gloria Tucker was a small woman with tired eyes and hands roughened by dish soap and hot water. But when she smiled, which wasn't often enough these days, her whole face transformed. There's my runner, she said, adjusting her diner uniform. She glanced at the grocery bags. Mrs. Patterson give you a tip this time? Zaden shook his head. Said she would next time. His mother sighed. She said that last time, too. She kissed his forehead, and then Mia's, who was doing homework at their small kitchen table. Dinner's in the fridge. Make sure your sister takes her medicine before bed. Before she reached the door, Zaden spoke up. Mom, there's this marathon coming up for high school students. There's a scholarship. Zaden, his mother interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. We've talked about this. We need every cent from your job. We need you here, helping with Mia. She touched his cheek. I know you love running, baby, but we can't afford pipe dreams right now. After she left, Zaden helped Mia with her science homework, heated up the macaroni and cheese their mother had left, and made sure his sister took her evening medications. When Mia was finally asleep, he slipped out again, this time heading toward the old high school football field that had been abandoned after budget cuts 3 years ago. To his surprise, Mr. Larkin was sitting in the bleachers, bundled in a heavy coat against the evening chill. Took you long enough, the old man called down as Zaden approached cautiously. What are you doing here? Zaden asked. Mr. Larkin held up a stopwatch. Thought you might want some proper timing. That old thing you're using looks like it's from the Stone Age. How did you know I'd be here? The old man shrugged. Where else would someone with your speed go to stretch their legs properly? Streets are too crowded and the park closes at sundown. He pointed to the track. Show me what you've got, son. Zaden hesitated, but something about the old man's confidence drew him in. He set down his backpack and moved to the starting line, his body automatically falling into position. Go, Mr. Larkin called out, and Zaden took off. Under the glow of the half-moon and distant streetlights, Zaden felt his body respond to the open space. He wasn't just running now, he was flying. When he completed the lap and slowed to a stop, breathing, heavily but evenly, Mr. Larkin was staring at the stopwatch with wide eyes. Well? Zaden asked. You've never had training? Not once? Zaden shook his head. Mr. Larkin whistled low. Then you're even more remarkable than I thought. He stood up. I could train you. Properly. At night, so it won't interfere with whatever else you've got going on. Why would you do that? Suspicion crept back into Zaden's voice. Because talent like yours comes along once in a lifetime. And I've lived long enough to recognize it. Mr. Larkin's eyes were serious now. But you have to promise to keep showing up. Every night, rain or shine. I don't waste my time on quitters. Zaden thought about his mother's warning, about Mia's medicine, about the endless responsibilities that anchored him to a life too small for his dreams. Then he thought about the feeling of freedom when he ran, the only time he felt truly seen, even if only by himself. I'll be here, he promised. As the moon climbed higher, casting long shadows across the abandoned field, Zaden ran lap after lap, while Mr. Larkin timed him from the bleachers. In those quiet hours, with only the sound of his feet striking the track and the old man's occasional shouts of encouragement, something important was beginning, something that would change both their lives forever. The memory came to Zaden often when he ran. That first time his legs became more than just limbs, but lifelines. He'd been 8 years old, playing with Mia in their small living room while their mother prepared dinner. One moment, Mia was laughing as they built a fort from couch cushions. The next, she was on the floor, lips turning blue, tiny hands clawing at her throat. Their mother's scream still echoed in his nightmares. Her inhaler! It's empty! The pharmacy was 12 blocks away. His mother had no car. The ambulance would take too long in their neighborhood. So Zaden ran, past neighbors who called after him, through intersections where cars honked and swerved, over fences and through alleys he'd never dared enter before. His lungs burned and his legs trembled, but he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. When he burst into the pharmacy, wild-eyed and gasping, the pharmacist took one look at his face and understood. The inhaler was in his hands moments later, and Zaden was running again, retracing his steps with desperate speed. By the time the ambulance finally arrived, Mia was breathing again, the emergency inhaler clutched in her small hand. The paramedics said Zaden had probably saved her life. That night, lying in bed, Zaden had stared at his legs with new wonder. They hadn't failed him. They hadn't shaken or given out. They had carried him faster than he'd ever moved before because they had, till he never forgot. "Again!" Mr. Larkin barked, his breath clouding in the cold night air. "And this time, keep your breathing even. 4 counts in, 4 counts out." 2 weeks into their training, and the old man had proven to be both a blessing and a torment. His methods were unorthodox, military drills mixed with techniques he'd learned from elite runners in his youth. They ran up the 20-floor stairwell of an abandoned apartment building, sprinted through drainage tunnels, and practiced barefoot on different terrains. Tonight they were at the track again, and Zaden was learning to control every aspect of his form. "Your body is a machine," Mr. Larkin explained, watching Zaden complete another lap. "But unlike other machines, it can rebuild itself stronger each time you push it to the limit." Zaden collapsed onto the grass, chest heaving. "Can't go anymore," he gasped. Mr. Larkin checked his watch. 3 minutes rest, then we go again, He lay there, staring up at the stars. Zaden's stomach growled loudly. Mr. Larkin frowned. "When did you last eat?" Zaden shrugged. "Lunch at school. Had some ramen before coming here." The next evening, Mr. Larkin brought a cooler filled with containers of grilled chicken, brown rice, and vegetables. "Leftovers from the Veterans Center," he explained gruffly when Zaden stared at the food. "Can't have you running on empty." After that, the cooler appeared regularly. Neither of them mentioned it, but Zaden noticed that the portions were always enough for him to take some home to Mia. "Someone's watching you," Mr. Larkin said one night, nodding toward the far end of the bleachers. Zaden followed his gaze and caught a glimpse of someone ducking behind the seats. Probably just kids messing around. But the figure appeared again, the next night and the next. On the 4th night after Mr. Larkin had gone home, Zaden circled back and approached the bleachers silently from behind. "I know you're there," he called out. "You might as well show yourself." Celeste emerged from the shadows, clutching her sketchbook. "Sorry," she said, not sounding particularly apologetic. "I didn't want to interrupt your training." "So you've been spying on me instead?" She opened her sketchbook and held it up. In the dim light, Zaden could make out page after page of sketches, all of him in motion. His form captured mid-stride, muscles defined, face set in concentration. They were beautiful. "I've been drawing you," she corrected. "There's a difference." Zaden didn't know how to respond to that. No one had ever paid this kind of attention to him before, not as something worth capturing, worth preserving. "Why?" he finally asked. Celeste closed the book. "Because when you run, it's like watching something that was meant to be exactly what it is." She smiled slightly. "That's rare." Saturday morning, Zaden broke his routine. Instead of his usual route, he decided to try the track at Mason Park, a well-maintained facility in a better part of town. He'd heard Mr. Larkin mention it was open to the public on weekends. He'd completed 3 laps when a hand grabbed his shoulder roughly. "Hey, you can't be here!" The security guard was a heavy-set white man with a ruddy face and a nameplate reading Thompson. "This track is for residents and registered visitors only." Zaden stepped back. "The sign says public hours on weekends." "Yeah, public. Not for loitering trash from the east side." The guard's eyes narrowed. "You look like you're casing the place. I've seen your type before." "I'm just running," Zaden said, keeping his voice even despite the anger rising in his chest. "Sure, you are." The guard snorted. "Get out before I call the real cops." As Zaden walked away, he noticed a group of runners on the opposite side of the track, all in matching prep school uniforms, all watching the exchange. One boy in particular stood out, tall, blonde, with an expensive smartwatch and custom running shoes. He was smirking. What Zaden didn't notice was Celeste sitting on a nearby bench, her phone raised, recording the entire incident. The prep school team became a recurring problem. They seemed to be everywhere Zaden went, public trails, parks, even the streets near his neighborhood. Their leader, Zaden learned, was named Bryce Whitman, son of a real estate developer and the reigning junior champion for 3 years running. Look, who it is, Bryce called out one afternoon as Zaden jogged past them on the riverside path. The janitor who thinks he's a runner. His friends laughed on cue. One of them mimicked Zaden's stride in an exaggerated, lumbering way that bore no resemblance to his actual form. What are those Payless specials? Another one jeered, pointing at Zaden's worn sneakers. Zaden kept his eyes forward and maintained his pace. Mr. Larkin had warned him about wasting energy on anger. Let it fuel you, the old man had advised, but never let it control you. Still, each encounter left a bitter taste in his mouth, a reminder of all the barriers that stood between him and any chance of success. What happened? Mr. Larkin demanded, staring at Zaden's swollen ankle. Zaden winced as the old man examined it. Pothole on Jefferson Street. Didn't see it until it was too late. The truth was more complicated. He'd been distracted, thinking about the marathon again. The registration deadline was approaching, and he still hadn't found a way to enter without belonging to an official running club, a requirement that seemed designed specifically to exclude people like him. You need to rest this, Mr. Larkin said firmly. At least 3 days. Can't, Zaden replied. We don't have 3 days to waste. It's not a waste if it prevents a worse injury. Mr. Larkin's voice was sharp with concern. You keep pushing like this, you'll break something that won't heal in time. Zaden shook his head stubbornly. I'll ice it tonight. It'll be fine tomorrow. Mr. Larkin stood up, suddenly looking every one of his 70-plus years. Zaden, listen to me. I've seen talent like yours before, raw, pure, beautiful, and I've seen it destroyed by impatience. He placed a heavy hand on Zaden's shoulder. The race is important, but it's not worth crippling yourself. Zaden limped home that night, frustrated and worried. When he opened the apartment door, he found his mother sitting at the kitchen table, a familiar blue flyer in her hands. His heart sank. Mrs. Phillips, from the school office, called today, she said without looking up. Said you've been asking about registration for this. She finally met his eyes. Why didn't you tell me? I did, Zaden said quietly. You said we couldn't afford pipe dreams. His mother's face crumpled. Because we can't, baby. Do you know what happens to boys like you who chase these things? They get their hopes crushed. They get shown the door. They get hurt. Her voice broke. I've watched it happen my whole life. It doesn't have to be like that, Zaden insisted. I'm good, Mom. Really good. You think that matters? She stood up, pacing the small kitchen. Your father was good too. Best basketball player in his high school. Got a scholarship offer and everything. Her laugh was bitter. Then they found out he had a record. One stupid mistake at 16, and suddenly he wasn't scholarship material anymore. Zaden had heard bits of this story before, but never the whole truth. His father had left when he was 3, unable to handle the constant rejection and closed doors. I'm not Dad, he said firmly. No, you're not, she agreed. You're better than he ever was. That's why I can't watch you get your heart broken. She took his hands in hers. We need the money from your job. Mia needs her medicine. I need your help. That's real, Zaden. That's guaranteed. This, she tapped the flyer. This is a fantasy. Zaden wanted to argue, to make her understand what running meant to him. But the weariness in her eyes stopped him. She'd been fighting her whole life just to keep them fed and housed. How could he ask her to believe in something so uncertain? I almost made it to the Olympics, Mr. Larkin said the following night, as they sat on the bleachers after a lighter training session. Zaden's ankle was still tender, but the swelling had gone down. You never told me that, Zaden said, surprised. Not something I talk about much. The old man's eyes were distant, seeing something from long ago. 1968. I was one of the fastest quarter-milers in the country. Had the trials all lined up. What happened? Mr. Larkin was quiet for a long moment. I stood with some friends at a civil rights protest. Got my picture in the paper, arm raised, fist closed. He shook his head. Next day, my coach told me the selection committee had concerns about my character, said I wasn't a good representative of American values. Zaden absorbed this in silence. They didn't even have the decency to say it was because I was black. They used words like temperament and attitude problem. Mr. Larkin's laugh was hollow. 57 years and it still burns. I'm sorry, Zaden said, not knowing what else to say. Don't be. I made my choice, and I'd make it again. Mr. Larkin turned to look at him directly. But you know what I regret? Not fighting harder afterward. I let them take running away from me completely. Don't ever let anyone do that to you, Zaden, not even the people who love you. That Sunday afternoon, Zaden sat in the corner of the laundromat, watching his mother sort through their clothes. The rhythmic tumble of the dryers nearly lulled him to sleep after a night of restless thinking. His mother's words echoed in his mind, colliding with Mr. Larkin's. Two people who cared about him, pulling him in opposite directions. As he watched his mother methodically fold each item, her uniform for the diner, Mia's school clothes, his own worn t-shirts, he saw the fatigue in every movement, the slight wince when she rotated her shoulder, the way she subtly stretched her back when she thought no one was looking. She deserved better than this endless cycle of work and worry. Mia deserved better than counting pennies for medicine. And maybe, just maybe, he deserved a chance to find out what his legs could really do. In that moment, sitting among the smell of detergent and warm cotton, Zaden made a promise to himself. I'm not just running for me anymore. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be obstacles, both physical and otherwise, that would try to stop him. But Zayden Tucker had been running his whole life, and he wasn't about to stop now. Not when he was finally finding his stride. The registration office was housed in a glass-fronted building downtown, the kind of place where Zaden normally only saw the service entrance. The lobby gleamed with polished floors and abstract art, making his worn sneakers and faded hoodie feel even more out of place. At the registration desk, a woman with perfectly styled hair glanced up from her computer, her smile professional but distant. Can I help you? I want to register for the junior marathon, Zaden said, sliding the crumpled application form across the counter. He'd spent hours filling it out, double-checking every detail. The woman scanned the form, her manicured nails clicking against her keyboard. Her expression shifted almost imperceptibly. You're not affiliated with any running club or school team? No. Ma'am, she cleared her throat. I'm afraid that's a requirement. All participants must have an official sponsorship from a recognized athletic organization or educational institution. She slid the form back. It's for insurance purposes. Zaden frowned. The flyer didn't say anything about that. It's in the fine print, she replied, pointing to a tiny paragraph at the bottom of the page. This ain't a walk-up competition, young man. These are serious athletes. Something in her tone made it clear what she was really saying. People like, you don't belong here. I am a serious athlete, Zaden said quietly. The woman's smile tightened. Then I suggest you join a proper running club and try again next year. Good day. Outside, Zaden sat on a bench, staring at the rejected application. All those early mornings, all those night training sessions, all those miles on his worn-out shoes, and it came down to a technicality. A rule that might as well have been designed specifically to keep people like him out. He didn't notice Celeste until she sat down beside him. No luck? She asked, though his face told her everything. Need to be in a club, Zaden muttered, or on a team. Celeste took the form from his hands, reading it carefully. That's such garbage, she said finally. You're twice as good as half the runners they'll let in. Doesn't matter how good I am if I can't even get to the starting line. Celeste was quiet for a moment, then pulled out her phone. Maybe we can change that. By the next morning, Celeste had created an online petition titled Let Zaden Run. She'd posted it everywhere, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, along with a powerful black and white photo she'd taken of Zaden mid-stride on the abandoned track. This is Zayden Tucker, her post read. He runs 5 miles before dawn every day. He trains at night after working to help support his family. He's faster than anyone I've ever seen. And they won't let him in the city's junior marathon because he doesn't belong to an official club. Let's change that. Let Zaden run. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within hours, hundreds of shares. By that evening, thousands of signatures. But with visibility came backlash. "Who's this kid think he is?" read one comment under the petition. "Some ghetto runner thinking he can just show up and compete with actual athletes?" Dusty Dash became a trending hashtag, accompanied by memes mocking Zaden's worn clothes and shoes. Someone created a video calling him cleanup crew cosplay, suggesting he'd be better suited to sweeping up after the race than running in it. Zaden tried to ignore it all. "It doesn't matter what they say," he told Celeste when she showed up at the track, furious about the online hate. "They don't know me." "That's exactly why it's so wrong," she insisted. "They're judging you without even giving you a chance." But not everyone was cruel. Veterans from Mr. Larkin Center started sharing their own stories of discrimination in sports. Former athletes posted supportive messages. A local sportswear store owner offered to donate proper running shoes. And then, most surprisingly, a USAOPA GoFundMe campaign appeared, set up by an anonymous donor to help pay Zaden's entry fee should the rules be amended, which miraculously, they were. 2 days later, the Marathon Committee issued a statement. "In light of community feedback, a limited number of independent entries will be accepted, subject to qualification standards and proper registration fees." Mr. Larkin had tears in his eyes when Zaden told him. "They're opening the door a crack," the old man said. "Now you just have to kick it down." The media picked up the story next. Local news outlets ran features about the underground runner, who had forced a change in the marathon's policies. Most focused on the feel-good angle, painting Zaden as an underdog worth rooting for. But Bryce Whitman and his team saw it differently. "So you're the charity case everyone's talking about," Bryce said, cornering Zaden after school one day. His prep school uniform looked freshly pressed, his shoes spotless despite the muddy spring day. Zaden tried to step around him. "I've got work." "Hey, I'm just being friendly," Bryce said, moving to block his path. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Actually, I think it's great you're joining the race. Makes for good entertainment." "Glad you're entertained," Zaden replied, flatly. "Tell you what," Bryce continued, raising his voice so the gathering crowd could hear. "I'll even slow down a bit to make it fun. You know, give people a real show before I take off for real." The snickers from Bryce's friends made Zaden's face burn, but he kept his expression neutral. "Don't do me any favors." "Oh, it's not for you," Bryce replied coolly. "It's for the sponsors. They love a good story before the real athletes finish the job." As Zaden finally pushed past him, Bryce called after him. "Better get some better shoes, though. I hear Walmart's having a sale." With just under 2 weeks until the marathon, Zaden pushed himself harder than ever. He extended his morning runs to 7 miles. He doubled his evening training with Mr. Larkin. He studied the marathon route obsessively, memorizing every turn, every hill, every potential challenge. "You're gonna burn yourself out," Mr. Larkin warned one night when Zaden collapsed after his 12th lap, breathing so hard he could barely speak. "Not enough time," Zaden gasped between breaths. "Need to be ready." Mr. Larkin knelt beside him, genuine concern in his weathered face. "Listen to me, son. You can't make up for years of professional training in 2 weeks. What you can do is protect what you already have, natural talent and heart, but not if you destroy yourself before race day." Zaden knew the old man was right, but the fear of failure drove him relentlessly. Every online comment, every smirk from Bryce and his friends, every doubt in his mother's eyes, they all pushed him to do more, run faster, train longer. The Marathon Committee organized a press day for the junior athletes, a photo opportunity, at the city park where the race would start. Zaden almost didn't go, but Mr. Larkin insisted it was part of the process. "You earned your place," the old man said firmly. "Don't let them pretend you're not there." But when Zaden arrived, it became clear that's exactly what they wanted to do. "Could all the runners please gather for a group photo?" the event coordinator called out. As the athletes, mostly from private schools and established running clubs, assembled, Zaden moved to join them. A hand on his arm stopped him. "We need you to stand aside for now," the coordinator said quietly. "Just until we get the official team shots done." Zaden stepped back, watching as camera flashes captured the real competitors. A reporter nearby, Not realizing Zaden could hear, leaned toward her cameraman and whispered, "Is that kid part of the catering crew? He keeps hovering in the background." The humiliation burned in Zaden's chest, but he reminded himself why he was there. Not for photos or recognition, but for a chance to run. For the scholarship that could change everything for his family. Just as he was about to leave, a voice called out, "Wait, you're missing one." Celeste stood at the edge of the gathered media, her school newspaper credentials hanging around her neck. She pointed directly at Zaden. "That's Zayden Tucker. He's the runner everyone's been talking about online." Suddenly, all eyes were on him. Some curious, some dismissive, some openly hostile. "Tell us, Zaden," one reporter asked, thrusting a microphone toward him. "Why do you run?" The question caught him off guard. No one had ever asked him that before, not in those simple terms. In the silence that followed, Zaden felt the weight of every mile he'd ever run. For his sister, for groceries, for escape, for peace, for a future beyond the constraints of his present. "I run," he said finally, his voice quiet but clear, "because walking won't get me out of here." The simplicity and raw truth of his answer silenced the crowd. Even the skeptical reporters seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Later that evening, Celeste's quote and photo of Zaden appeared in the local paper and then spread online. "I run because walking won't get me out of here." 7 words that captured everything he couldn't fully explain, not even to himself. The night before the race, Zaden found his mother sitting at their kitchen table when he returned from his final light training session with Mr. Larkin. "You've been different lately," she said. "Stronger somehow." Zaden sat across from her, suddenly aware of how tired she looked. "Mom, about the race." "I know," she interrupted. "I've known for weeks. Mrs. Davis from the building saw you training with that old veteran." She reached across the table and took his hand. "She also told me how good you are. You're not mad?" She shook her head. "I was. Then I was scared. Now I'm just..." She paused, searching for the right word. "Proud, I guess. And still scared." "I could win," Zaden said softly. "The scholarship, it could help with Mia's treatments, maybe even college someday." His mother squeezed his hand. "I know, baby. That's why I went to watch you one night." She smiled at his surprised expression. "You didn't see me. I stayed in the shadows. But I saw you fly around that track like gravity was just a suggestion." She stood up and went to the refrigerator, returning with a plate covered in foil. When she pulled it back, Zaden saw his favorite meal: baked chicken with his grandmother's special seasoning, collard greens, and macaroni and cheese. "Figured you should eat something good tonight," she said, sliding the plate toward him. Underneath, it was a note in her careful handwriting: "Run for all of us." That night, Zaden lay awake, staring at the ceiling of the small bedroom he shared with Mia. His sister's gentle breathing provided a rhythm to the thoughts racing through his mind. Every doubt, every fear, every insult he'd endured echoed in his head. The security guard calling him trash, Bryce's smug smile, the registration lady's dismissive tone, the whispered comments about the catering crew, but other sounds followed. Mr. Larkin's gruff encouragement, Celeste's fierce defense, his mother's quiet pride, his sister's laughter when he'd promised to buy her a new bike with part of the scholarship money. Outside, a distant siren wailed. A car bass thumped somewhere down the block. The city never truly slept, and neither would Zaden tonight. Tomorrow everything would change, one way or another. Dawn broke clear and cool on race day, perfect running weather. Zaden stood at his window, watching the sun paint the sky in strokes of gold and pink, the same sunrise he'd greeted countless mornings before. But today felt different. Today, he wasn't just running to watch the day begin. Today, he was running toward something new. His race outfit was humble compared to what the other competitors would wear. His shorts were basic black, purchased from a discount store. His shirt was a plain white tee that his mother had carefully ironed. The only new items were socks. Thick, cushioned running socks that Mr. Larkin had insisted on. "Blisters can end a race faster than any competitor," the old man had warned. His number, 4 and 12, was pinned carefully to his shirt, the edges reinforced with clear tape to prevent tearing. The shoes on his feet were his usual worn pair. The GoFundMe. Money had come through, but too late to break in a new pair properly. Mr. Larkin had been adamant. Never race in new shoes. That's asking for trouble. Zaden caught a city bus to the start line, sitting quietly in the back as other passengers in colorful supporter t-shirts chattered excitedly about the event. No one paid him any attention. Just another black kid heading downtown on a Saturday morning. When he arrived at the starting area, the contrast between him and the other competitors was immediately apparent. They milled around in matching team uniforms, professional gear, and specialized equipment. Personal trainers and coaches hovered nearby, offering last-minute advice and encouragement. Zaden stood alone, stretching carefully the way Mr. Larkin had taught him. The old man had wanted to come, but his arthritis was acting up badly after a rainy week. "I'll be watching from the Veterans Center," he'd promised. "They're showing it on the big screen." As runners began gathering near the starting line, Zaden moved to join them. He was checking his laces one last time when a voice came from behind him. "Excuse me, you'll need to stand back until cleanup is needed." Zaden turned to see a race volunteer, a middle-aged woman with a clipboard and an official-looking vest. Her expression shifted from officiousness to embarrassment when she saw his number. "Oh, you're competing?" She looked him up and down, taking in his simple outfit and worn shoes. Before Zaden could respond, a snort came from nearby. "Try not to trip, janitor," said a familiar voice. Bryce stood a few feet away, resplendent in his team's blue and silver uniform, surrounded by his equally well-equipped teammates. "The real runners need a clear path." Zaden said nothing. He simply moved toward the starting area, focusing on his breathing the way Mr. Larkin had taught him. In, 4 counts. Out, 4 counts. Center yourself. Find your calm. As he took his position, he felt a hand on his shoulder. An older black man in a race official's uniform gave him a slight nod. "Good luck, son," he said quietly before moving. On that small moment of recognition carried Zaden through the next few minutes, as the announcer's voice boomed over the loudspeakers, explaining the rules and introducing the favored competitors. Bryce's name was met with enthusiastic applause. Zaden's wasn't mentioned at all. Just before the starting gun, Zaden felt someone approach. Mr. Larkin had somehow made it after all, standing just behind the barriers, his face drawn with pain, but his eyes bright with determination. "You don't need to win their applause," the old man said, his voice barely audible over the crowd noise. "Just the finish line." Zaden nodded, a lump forming in his throat. Then he turned, faced forward, and prepared himself. The gun fired. Immediately, Zaden found himself boxed out as other runners surged forward, forming tight packs that left him no space to maneuver. He was forced to start dead last, watching as the colorful mass of competitors pulled ahead. This wasn't an accident. Zaden could see the sideways glances, the subtle body positioning. They were making sure the outsider stayed outside. For the first half-mile, Zaden had to run at a pace well below his capacity, trapped behind slower runners who nonetheless refused to let him pass. Every time he tried to find an opening, someone would shift position, closing the gap. "Stay patient," Mr. Larkin had advised during their final strategy session. "The race is long. Let them waste energy on games." So Zaden bided his time, conserving his strength while studying the patterns of movement ahead of him. By the first mile marker, he began to see the possibilities, the small gaps between runners, the rhythm of their strides, the moments when focus wavered. At the first water station, he made his move. While others slowed to grab cups, Zaden accelerated, slipping through spaces that hadn't existed seconds before. He reached for a water cup himself, only to have the volunteer turn away at the last moment, pretending not to see him. Thirst would have to wait. By mile 3, Zaden had worked his way through the back third of the pack. The runners here were more focused on their own races, less concerned with blocking him. His confidence grew with each person he passed. Then came the fall. He never saw exactly what happened, just felt a sudden body check from his right, a runner veering into his path without warning. Zaden's foot caught, and he went down hard, scraping his palms and knee on the rough pavement. For a moment, he lay there, the shock of impact vibrating through his bones. Around him, feet pounded past, no one slowing to help. He heard a laugh, familiar, mocking, as one of Bryce's teammates glanced back. The fall had been deliberate. As Zaden pushed himself up, wincing at the sting of raw skin on asphalt, time seemed to slow. In that moment of pain and humiliation, with blood beginning to seep through his torn shorts, memories flashed before him. Running through traffic at age 8, his sister's inhaler clutched in his small hand, sprinting to deliver groceries to old Mrs. Patterson before her medicine made her too drowsy to answer the door, racing to catch the school bus in the rain, textbooks protected under his jacket, dashing through alleys to avoid the corner boys who tried to recruit anyone who looked lost or alone, every desperate sprint, every necessary race, every moment when his legs had carried him exactly where he needed to go. He hadn't fallen then. He wouldn't stay down now. Zaden rose, brushed the grit from his bloody palms, and began to run again. Not with anger or vengeance, but with purpose. With the calm certainty of someone who had been running his whole life for something more important than a medal. By mile 6, spectators began to notice. The crowds lining the route were thinning as the course moved into less populated areas, but those who remained started pointing and whispering as Zaden methodically overtook runner after runner. "Who is that?" he heard someone ask as he passed. "Number 412, another replied, checking the race program. "Tucker? Never heard of him." "Well, he's flying now." Flying. Yes. That's exactly how it felt. Despite the stinging in his knee, despite the thirst building in his throat, Zaden had found his rhythm, the perfect harmony of breath and stride that Mr. Larkin had helped him discover during those long night sessions. As he approached the halfway point, Zaden had moved into the top 30. Ahead he could see the distinctive blue and silver uniforms of Bryce's team, still running in a tight formation near the leaders. One of them glanced back, did a double take, and urgently whispered to his teammates. The news rippled through there, formation like a stone dropped in still water. He's gaining. The thought must have passed from runner to runner because suddenly their perfect formation became ragged. Some accelerated, pushing beyond their sustainable pace. Others looked back more frequently, their concentration broken. Zaden kept his eyes forward, his mind clear. Mr. Larkin's voice echoed in his memory. "The only clock that matters is your own. The only opponent that matters is the voice that tells you to quit." That voice was silent today. As Zaden passed a giant screen showing race coverage, he caught a glimpse of himself for the first time. Lean body in motion, determination etched. On his face, blood-stained knee a badge of resilience. For a split second, he barely recognized the person he saw. That wasn't Invisible Boy anymore. That was a runner. That was someone who belonged exactly where he was, and the city was finally starting to see it too. Mile 9 marked the moment everything changed. Zaden had been steadily advancing through the field, his form growing stronger rather than weaker, as the miles accumulated. While other runners began to show the familiar signs of fatigue, shoulders hunching, strides shortening, breathing becoming labored, Zaden maintained the mechanical precision that Mr. Larkin had drilled into him night after night. "Running isn't just about strength," the old man had told him. "It's about efficiency. Every wasted movement is energy you can't get back." Now, as Zaden overtook the 20th runner, then the 15th, that efficiency was paying dividends. His breathing remained controlled. His arms swung in perfect counterbalance to his stride. His feet struck the ground with just enough force to propel him forward, not an ounce of energy wasted on unnecessary impact. As he approached the lead pack, the elite 10 runners who had been featured in all the pre-race coverage, a murmur rippled through the spectators lining the course. The blue and silver uniforms of Bryce's team dominated the front positions, with Bryce himself setting the pace. When Bryce glanced back casually to check his lead, his confident smile faltered. There, just seconds behind his teammates, was the one runner who wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the front. Number 412, the kid in the plain white t-shirt with blood-stained knees and a look of absolute focus. Bryce's double take was caught by a nearby camera crew. His expression of disbelief flashed across the giant screens positioned along the route. And suddenly, The crowd found a new hero. Zaden! Zaden! The chant began hesitantly at first, spectators squinting at the number on his shirt to confirm the name they'd heard in news reports. But it quickly gained momentum, rolling through the crowd like thunder. Zaden! Zaden! For the first time since the race began, Zaden allowed himself to really hear the crowd. The sound of his name, shouted by hundreds of strangers, sent a surge of energy through his tired muscles. These weren't people who knew him from school or his neighborhood. They had no reason to cheer for him except the pure joy of witnessing something extraordinary. In the broadcast booth overlooking the course, the race commentators scrambled to adjust their narrative. "We're seeing something remarkable here, Tim," said the lead announcer, shuffling through his notes. "Zayden Tucker, who wasn't even on our pre-race radar, has moved into the top 10 at the 9-mile mark." "That's right, Dave," his colleague responded, tapping urgently on his tablet. "We're getting information now. Tucker is 14 years old, running as an independent entry. There was apparently some controversy about his registration." "Controversy might be understating it," a third voice chimed in, a field reporter, who had just rushed into the booth. "This kid was initially denied entry because he doesn't belong to any official running club. There was a whole social media campaign to get him in." "Well, it looks like whoever fought for his inclusion was onto something," Dave replied, watching the monitors as Zaden continued to gain ground. "His form is, just look at that stride. That's not something you develop overnight." The network quickly cut to a split screen, showing Zaden's advance alongside Bryce Whitman's increasingly anxious backward glances. The contrast made for compelling television, the established champion in his professional gear versus the unknown challenger in a simple white tee. Within minutes, Zaden runs was trending. At the Veterans Center, where a crowd had gathered to watch the race, Mr. Larkin sat in stunned silence as Zaden methodically closed the gap on the leaders. Beside him, other veterans, men and women who had served in conflicts spanning from Vietnam to Afghanistan, watched with growing excitement. "That's your boy, James?" asked Frank Peterson, a former Marine who had lost his right leg below the knee in Desert Storm. Mr. Larkin nodded, unable to find words. "Kid runs like he was born to do it," Frank continued, leaning forward in his wheelchair. "Reminds me of you, back in the day." A younger veteran, Darnell Williams, who had been recording the broadcast on his phone, suddenly held it up. "You all need to see this, it's blowing up online." He turned the screen to show a side-by-side comparison someone had posted, an old black and white photo of a young James Larkin mid-stride from his racing days, next to a shot of Zaden from today's race. The similarity in form was uncanny. The caption read, "Some things skip a generation, some things find their way home. Dr. Zaden runs, Dr. Full Circle." Mr. Larkin's eyes filled with tears. Celeste Williams was running too, not in the race, but alongside it, darting between spectator areas with her phone held high, live streaming Zaden's journey. Her commentary was breathless but passionate. "He's still moving up. The coaches from Westmont Prep are freaking out right now. Look at their faces." Her live stream had started with just a few dozen viewers, mostly classmates and people who had followed the initial petition. But as Zaden's story caught fire, those numbers exploded. Thousands, then tens of thousands tuned in to watch Celeste's raw, unfiltered coverage of the race's unexpected development. "For those just joining," she narrated as she ran to the next viewing point, "that's Zayden Tucker in the white shirt. The same guy these elite school runners mocked last week. The same guy race officials mistook for janitor staff. And now he's about to, oh my God." Her camera captured the moment Zaden overtook the 10th place runner, officially entering the lead pack. The crowd's roar was so loud it distorted the audio on her phone. What Celeste's live stream also captured, which the official broadcast missed, was the hurried conference taking place between Bryce's coach and his team's support staff. Their gestures were agitated, their expressions grim. Something was happening that wasn't part of their carefully constructed plan. Back on the course, Bryce Whitman was receiving urgent instructions through his earpiece, a piece of technology that wasn't technically forbidden but certainly pushed the boundaries of fair competition. "He's still gaining," his coach's voice crackled. "You need to surge now. Put distance between you before the hill section. Bryce, his confidence rattled for the first time in his racing career, responded by dramatically increasing his pace. His teammates, caught off guard by the sudden acceleration, struggled to match him. Their formation, which had been so disciplined, for the first 9 miles, began to fragment. What Bryce didn't understand, what his expensive coaches and data analysts had failed to recognize, was that his perfectly optimized race strategy had just been thrown into chaos by the presence of a variable they hadn't accounted for. By pushing now, he was burning energy reserves meant for the final miles. Zaden, meanwhile, maintained his steady rhythm. He had no earpiece, no coach calling out split times or adjustments. He had only the lessons Mr. Larkin had drilled into him, and an intimate knowledge of his own body's capabilities. As they approached the race's most challenging section, a series of rolling hills between miles 10 and 12, Zaden had closed to within 20 seconds of Bryce. Close enough that when disaster struck, he witnessed it firsthand. One of Bryce's teammates, a tall senior named Scott Thatcher, dropped back slightly as they approached a hydration station. As Zaden drew near, Scott grabbed an energy gel packet and a cup of sports drink. He made a show of fumbling with both, then accidentally spilled the bright blue liquid directly in Zaden's path. It happened so fast that Zaden had no time to adjust. His foot hit the slick surface and shot out from under him. For the second time in the race, he found himself crashing to the pavement, this time twisting sideways as he fell, his shoulder and right knee absorbing most of the impact. The pain was immediate and intense. Zaden rolled onto his back, the wind knocked from his lungs, his vision momentarily blurred by the shock. Around him, feet pounded past, none stopping to help. At the Veterans Center, Mr. Larkin rose to his feet with a cry of outrage. "That was deliberate," he shouted at the screen. The other veterans voiced their agreement, their faces darkening with anger at the blatant sabotage. For a terrible moment, Mr. Larkin thought it was over. All those early mornings, all those training sessions, all that heart and determination, undone by a cheap trick from a privileged kid who couldn't stand the thought of being beaten fairly. Then, on the screen, Zaden moved. The pain radiated from Zaden's shoulder and knee in pulsing waves. Each breath sent a stab through his ribs where he'd twisted on impact. Logic told him to stay down, to accept that some battles couldn't be won when the field was this uneven. But as he lay there, staring up at the clear blue sky, a different voice spoke in his mind. Not Mr. Larkin's gruff encouragement or his mother's worried warnings, but his sister's. He remembered Mia at 6 years old, struggling to breathe during an asthma attack, her small face contorted with fear. He remembered holding her hand in the emergency room as doctors worked to stabilize her, and he remembered what she had whispered to him afterward, her voice raspy from the oxygen mask. "When I can't breathe, I get so scared. But then I think of you running to help me, and I'm not scared anymore." Zaden had promised her that day that he would always run when she needed him, that he would never be too tired or too far away, that his legs would never fail her, and they wouldn't fail him now. With a groan that came from somewhere deep in his chest, Zaden pushed himself up. His right knee screamed in protest, but he forced it to bend, to take his weight. His shoulder throbbed as he used it to balance himself, but he was up. He was standing, and then he was running again. His stride was off, compromised by the fresh injuries. His pace was slower, his breath more labored. But he was moving forward, each step a defiant statement against those who thought he would stay down. The spectators who witnessed his rise erupted in cheers that seemed to lift him, propelling him forward despite the pain. A race official on a bicycle approached, concern evident on his face. "You're bleeding pretty badly," the man said, riding alongside Zaden. "Medical can check you out at the next station." Zaden said nothing. He simply kept running, his eyes fixed on the distant figures of the lead pack, now further ahead than before his fall. The official rode beside him a moment longer, then nodded in understanding and pulled away. This wasn't about a medal anymore. This was about something far more fundamental. Celeste had captured the entire incident on her live stream. The deliberate spill, the fall, and most importantly, Zaden's rise and continued progress. As she ran, To the next viewing point, she provided breathless commentary, her voice tight with fury. "Did you all see that? That was Scott Thatcher from Westmont Prep. That spill was no accident. They're cheating because they're scared." Her righteous anger resonated with viewers. Comments flooded in, demanding penalties, disqualifications, justice. The hashtag, Let Zaden Run, evolved into Justice for Zaden in real time. At the next media checkpoint, Celeste spotted a familiar face. Linda Hargrove, a local radio reporter who had covered the petition story days earlier. Without hesitation, Celeste approached her, still live streaming. "Ms. Hargrove, did you see what just happened at the hydration station near mile 10? The reporter, recognizing an opportunity, immediately offered Celeste her microphone. "Tell our listeners what you witnessed, Celeste." With cameras rolling and radio broadcasting live, Celeste laid out what she had seen: the deliberate sabotage, the lack of intervention by race officials, and the broader pattern of discrimination that had followed Zaden from the beginning. "This isn't just about one race," she concluded, her voice steady despite her emotion. "This is about who gets to belong, who gets to compete, who gets to dream. And I'm tired of watching people like Zaden have to run twice as hard just to get half as far." Her words, broadcast live across local media and amplified through her still-running livestream, hit like a thunderclap. Within minutes, race officials were being bombarded with calls and messages demanding action. Bryce Whitman wasn't aware of the brewing storm on social media. He was too focused on the race and on the growing certainty that something was wrong. Despite the surge his coach had ordered, despite the elimination of his unexpected challenger through his teammates' intervention, Bryce didn't feel in control anymore. His carefully structured race plan had been disrupted, and now his body was sending warning signals. A tightness in his calves, a burning in his lungs that came too early, the first whispers of doubt in his mind. When his coach's voice came through the earpiece again, it carried an edge of panic that Bryce had never heard before. "They're reviewing the footage from the hydration station. Scott might be disqualified, and the Tucker kid is still running. He's gaining again." Bryce risked a glance over his shoulder. Sure enough, there was the white shirt in the distance, bloodied and dirt-stained now, but still moving forward with that same mechanical precision. The gap had widened after the fall, but it was closing again, inexorably. For the first time in his racing career, Bryce felt something unfamiliar. Fear. Not of losing. He had lost training runs before, though never an official race. No, this was the fear of being revealed, of being seen not as the natural champion his father had always presented him as, but as something else entirely. As Bryce rounded the corner toward mile 12, the city skyline came into view, a gleaming promise on the horizon. The finish line was still miles away, but suddenly it felt both too distant and too close. A reckoning he was no longer certain he could face. By mile 13, the elite pack had disintegrated. The punishing hills combined with Bryce's premature surge had taken their toll, separating the field into smaller groups of 2 or 3 runners, fighting their own private battles against fatigue. Zaden had moved into 7th place, his injured knee forcing him to adapt his stride into something slightly asymmetrical, but still remarkably efficient. The pain had settled into a constant throb that he acknowledged without surrendering to. Each footfall sent a jolt up his leg, but he had found a rhythm that minimized the impact. Ahead of him, he could see 2 more of Bryce's teammates, Scott, who had spilled the drink, and another runner named Tyler. They were struggling visibly, now their form deteriorating as the miles accumulated. Bryce himself was further ahead, still in the lead, but no longer pulling away. As Zaden closed in on the pair, Scott glanced back, his face registering disbelief that quickly transformed into something uglier. "How the hell are you still running?" he spat as Zaden drew alongside them. Zaden didn't waste breath on a response. He simply maintained his pace, preparing to pass them on the inside of the upcoming curve. "I'm talking to you, trash runner," Scott continued, moving slightly to block Zaden's path. "You don't belong up here with the real athletes." Tyler, looking uncomfortable, tried to intervene. "Scott, come on, man, just run your race." But Scott wasn't finished. As they approached the curve, he drifted further inward, forcing Zaden to either slow down or move to the outside where the path was less optimal. It was a classic racing tactic, aggressive but usually within the rules. What Scott didn't anticipate was Zaden's response. Instead of yielding or trying to force his way through, Zaden simply maintained his position, letting Scott edge closer and closer until their arms were nearly touching. Then, just as Scott attempted to deliver a subtle elbow to Zaden's ribs, Zaden accelerated sharply, using the momentum of Scott's own motion to slingshot himself forward. The sudden burst of speed caught Scott off guard. He stumbled slightly, losing his rhythm, and in that moment, Zaden was past both him and Tyler, moving into 5th place. The move cost him dearly in terms of energy, sending fresh waves of pain through his injured knee. But the psychological victory was worth it. Behind him, he heard Scott cursing, his frustration a confirmation of Zaden's success. The medical support team had been alerted to Zaden's condition after his second fall. A medic on a bicycle now approached him, concern evident on her face, as she took in his bloodied knee and the awkward compensation in his stride. "Runner 412, I need to assess your injuries," she called, pulling alongside him. "I'm fine," Zaden replied, the words coming between controlled breaths. The medic wasn't convinced. "Your knee could have structural damage. Continuing could cause permanent injury." For the first time since the race began, Zaden felt a flicker of doubt. He wasn't naive about his body's limitations. The pain in his knee had evolved from sharp to deep, suggesting something more serious than just scrapes and bruises. And he still had miles to go. But stopping now meant surrender. It meant letting Bryce and his team win not just the race, but the larger battle over who belonged and who didn't. "I appreciate your concern," Zaden said, not breaking stride. "But I'm going to finish." The medic stayed with him a moment longer, her professional duty warring with reluctant admiration. Finally, she nodded. "It's your race, but I'll be nearby, if you need me." As she pulled away, Zaden focused on regulating his breathing again. The conversation had disrupted his rhythm, and he needed to find his center. Mr. Larkin had taught him to compartmentalize pain during their training, to acknowledge it without letting it dominate his consciousness. "Pain is information," the old man had said. "Listen to it, respect it, but don't let it make decisions for you." Right now, the pain was telling Zaden that his body was reaching its limits. But his heart was telling him something else entirely. Across town, in a coffee shop with a television tuned to the local news, Celeste sat with her sketchbook open, watching the race coverage while her fingers moved across the page with practiced precision. The drawing taking shape under her hands captured Zaden in motion, not as he appeared now, bloodied and limping, but as she had first seen him weeks ago, running barefoot across an empty field at dawn. In her rendering, his feet barely touched the ground. His body seemed to float above the earth, more spirit than flesh. Around him, she had sketched birds in flight, their wings outstretched in the same expression of freedom that Zaden embodied when he ran. A news producer, scanning the coffee shop for local color to include in their broadcast, spotted Celeste's drawing over her shoulder. Within minutes, it was being filmed for a segment on the community's response to the race. "This is how I always see him," Celeste explained when asked about the image. "Not tied down by anything, just free." The segment aired during a brief lull in the race coverage. When the cameras returned to the course, they brought with them a shocking revelation that was just breaking on social media. "We're receiving reports," the lead announcer said, his tone carefully neutral but his expression betraying surprise, "that a whistleblower has come forward with allegations concerning Bryce Whitman and the Westmont prep running program." His co-commentator leaned forward, equally stunned. "That's right, Dave. According to these reports, Bryce's father, Maxwell Whitman, allegedly paid for an unauthorized performance enhancement program for his son and possibly other team members. The allegations include falsified training data and the use of substances that, while not explicitly banned, certainly push ethical boundaries." "We should emphasize that these are just allegations at this point," Dave cautioned. "But they're coming from a credible source, a former assistant coach at Westmont who claims to have documentation." As they spoke, the cameras tracked Bryce, still running in the lead position but now visibly struggling. His form had deteriorated significantly, his stride shortened, and his shoulders hunched. And now, the close-up shots revealed something else, fear in his eyes as he repeatedly glanced at his coach waiting at the next checkpoint. Bryce heard the news through his earpiece, his father's panicked voice replacing his coach's measured instructions. "Don't listen to anything they're saying," Maxwell Whitman urged, his words tumbling over each other. "Just finish the race. We'll handle this afterward." But Bryce could already feel the weight of revelation crushing him. For 3 years, he had believed himself to be exactly what his father and coaches had told him he was, a natural champion, genetically gifted, destined for athletic greatness. The training regimen his father had arranged, the special supplements, the oxygen therapies, the carefully managed diet, had all been presented as simply optimizing his inherent talents. Now, as his body began to rebel against the pace he'd been forced to maintain, as the truth about his success became public, Bryce felt something inside him crumble. The facade was collapsing, and beneath it was just a scared, ordinary boy who had never been allowed to fail. At mile 14, with Zaden now in 4th place and still advancing, Bryce Whitman did something no one had ever seen him do before. He stopped. It wasn't a gradual slowdown or a strategic pause to catch his breath. It was a complete surrender. One moment he was running, the next he was standing motionless in the middle of the course, tears streaming down his face as the weight of pretense finally proved too heavy to carry. The cameras captured his breakdown, in merciless detail, the heaving sobs, the way he waved off his coach's attempts to intervene, the moment he pulled the earpiece out and threw it to the ground. "I can't," he gasped, the words picked up by nearby microphones. "I can't do this anymore." The race marshals moved quickly to guide him off the course, but the damage was done. The Golden Boy, the presumptive champion, had broken in full view of the city he had been groomed to represent. And as Bryce Whitman's running career imploded in real time, Zayden Tucker continued his steady advance, now in 3rd place with less than 2 miles to go. The hill at mile 15 was the race's final major obstacle, a long, grinding incline that tested already exhausted legs and burning lungs. Under normal circumstances, it would have been challenging. For Zaden, with his injured knee screaming in protest at each step, it was excruciating. His pace slowed dramatically as he began the ascent. The 2 runners ahead of him, a senior from a rival prep school and the last remaining member of Bryce's team still in contention, pulled away slightly, opening a gap that seemed to grow with each labored step. Sweat poured down Zaden's face, stinging his eyes and blurring his vision. His breathing, so controlled throughout the race, became ragged. His water bottle had been lost in his second fall, and dehydration was taking its toll, his mouth dry and his head beginning to pound. For the first time since the starting gun, Zaden felt the insidious whisper of defeat. His body was reaching its absolute limits. The pain was no longer information. It was a scream, a demand to stop. As his pace slowed further, as the gap ahead widened, those doubts grew louder. What was he really proving here? That he could hurt himself trying to beat a system designed to exclude him? That he could run himself into the ground for a principle? Then, through the fog of pain and doubt, he heard it. Faintly at first, then growing stronger. A chant from the crowd lining the hill. "Zaden! Zaden! Zaden!" They were still with him, still believing. Even as his body faltered, their faith remained unshaken. And somewhere in that crowd was Mr. Larkin, who had seen his own dreams crushed, but had found the courage to invest in someone else's. Somewhere was Celeste, who had used her voice and talent to make sure Zaden's story was heard. Somewhere was his mother, who had set aside her fears to let him chase this impossible goal. And waiting at home was Mia, who believed her big brother could do anything. Zaden had promised himself, "I'm not just running for me anymore." It was time to keep that promise. With a surge of will that transcended physical limitation, Zaden forced his tired legs to quicken their pace. The pain didn't diminish, if anything it intensified, but he pushed through it, focusing on the crest of the hill ahead, one step, another, each one an act of defiance against limitation, against exclusion, against every voice that had ever told him to stay in his place. As he reached the top of the hill, the course leveled out, offering a brief respite before the final push to the finish line. Ahead, the two lead runners were visible, their own fatigue evident in their labored strides. The gap was closing again. The race wasn't over, and Zayden Tucker wasn't done running. The final mile unfolded like a dream, the kind where everything slows down, yet happens with crystal clarity. Zaden had passed the second-place runner halfway down the hill, the momentum of the descent giving him an advantage despite his injured knee. Now only one competitor remained ahead, Tyler Matthews, the last Westmont prep runner still in contention. Tyler was a senior with college scouts watching. Unlike Scott or Bryce, he'd kept his distance from the dirty tactics, focusing solely on his own race. But he'd benefited from the same training program, the same advantages, the same system designed to ensure victory for a select few. As they approached the final turn, a sweeping right-hander that would bring the finish line into view, Tyler glanced back. The look on his face when he saw Zaden so close was a mixture of disbelief and grudging respect. He dug deeper, finding another gear, refusing to surrender without a fight. But Zaden had been fighting his entire life. The last corner loomed ahead. Zaden remembered Mr. Larkin's words from their final strategy session. The last turn is where races are won or lost. Swing wide going in, cut tight coming out. Use the momentum like a slingshot. As Tyler took the inside line, Zaden swung wide, exactly as Mr. Larkin had instructed. For a moment, it looked like a mistake. The gap between them widened slightly. But as they emerged from the turn, Zaden's path straightened sooner, and his momentum carried him forward with sudden, unstoppable force. He drew alongside Tyler with 100 yards to go. Their eyes met briefly, one runner who had been given every advantage, another who had overcome every obstacle. In that moment, something like understanding passed between them. Then, Zaden pulled ahead. The crowd's reaction was seismic. The roar that erupted seemed to shake the very pavement beneath Zaden's feet. People leaned out of apartment windows overlooking the course, their shouts adding to the wall of sound. Reporters sprinted alongside the barriers, cameras trained on the unexpected leader. Through it all, Zaden maintained his focus. His vision had narrowed to a tunnel, with only the finish line visible at its end. The pain in his knee had transformed into something beyond physical sensation, a bright electric current that connected him to every step he had ever run. As he entered the final straightaway, time seemed to stretch. 50 yards became a lifetime. Each stride was a battle against gravity, against exhaustion, against the weight of every doubt that had ever been cast upon him. The faces in the crowd blurred together, but one stood out with perfect clarity. Celeste, fighting her way to the front, an inhaler clutched in her hand. She had anticipated his need, prepared for the possibility that Zaden might collapse at the end, just as Mia sometimes did after physical exertion. Their eyes met for the briefest moment. In hers, Zaden saw not just support or excitement, but a kind of awe, the pure, unfiltered recognition of witnessing something extraordinary. The finish line tape stretched across the road ahead, bright against the asphalt. 10 yards. 5. Zaden's legs were moving on pure will now, his body having exhausted every resource. In those final steps, the world fell silent in Zaden's perception. The crowd's roar receded. The pain diminished. Even the sound of his own labored breathing seemed distant. In that strange, suspended moment, he felt utterly free, unbound by expectation or limitation. This was what he had always found in running, magnified 1,000-fold. Not escape, but transcendence. He broke the tape with his chest, arms raised not in triumph, but in release, letting go of every burden he had carried to this point. There was no photo finish needed. No dramatic last-second overtaking. Zayden Tucker didn't just win, he shattered the course record by 37 seconds. The competition wasn't even close. The moment the tape broke against his chest, sound and sensation came rushing back with overwhelming force. The crowd's deafening cheer, the sharp sting of his injuries, the sudden crushing fatigue as adrenaline ebbed away. Zaden took 2 more stumbling steps, then his legs finally surrendered. He collapsed, not from failure but from completion, his body having given everything it had to give. He fell not to the ground, but into Celeste's waiting arms. She had anticipated his trajectory perfectly, positioning herself to catch him as his strength gave out. "I made it," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the crowd's roar. "You did more than that," she replied, supporting his weight as medical staff rushed toward them. "You changed everything." The next few minutes passed in a blur of activity. Paramedics checked his vitals, cleaned his wounds, applied temporary bandages to his bleeding knee. Reporters shouted questions that Zaden was too exhausted to process, let alone answer. Race officials conferred urgently, verifying his time and position as if they couldn't quite believe what they had witnessed. Through it all, Zaden remained in a state of dazed detachment, present but not fully connected to the chaos around him. His body had reached its absolute limit, and his mind wasn't far behind. Then a commotion at the perimeter of the secured area caught his attention. A familiar voice rose above the din, his mother, demanding to be let through. Security staff were blocking her path, insisting on credentials she didn't possess. With the last of his strength, Zaden called out, "That's my family. Let them in." The barriers parted, and Gloria Tucker burst through. Mia clutched tightly to her side. When she saw her son, bloodied, bandaged but victorious, she stopped short, one hand rising to cover her mouth. For a moment, they simply stared at each other across the distance. Then Gloria was moving again, pulling Mia with her, pushing through the crowd of officials and reporters until she reached her son. No words were needed. She took his scraped, dirty hand in hers and held it against her cheek, tears streaming freely down her face. Mia wrapped her small arms around his waist, burying her face in his sweat-soaked shirt. "You did it," his mother finally whispered. "You really did it." Before Zaden could respond, another disturbance rippled through the crowd. Bryce Whitman was forcing his way toward the finish area, his face flushed with anger rather than exertion. Security tried to intercept him, but he pushed past, making a beeline for Zaden and the cluster of officials nearby. "This isn't fair," he shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. "He doesn't even have a proper coach. He doesn't train with a team. He's nobody." The outburst silenced the immediate area, creating a bubble of uncomfortable stillness amid the celebration. All eyes turned to Bryce, then to Zaden, waiting for the confrontation to unfold. But before Zaden could respond, a commotion behind Bryce drew everyone's attention. A group of police officers had entered the secured area. With them was Maxwell Whitman, Bryce's father, his hand secured behind his back, his expression a mask of cold fury. "Mr. Whitman is being taken in for questioning," one officer explained to the stunned race officials. "Allegations of fraud, illegal performance enhancement, and falsification of athletic records." Bryce's face crumpled as he watched his father being led away. In that moment, he seemed to shrink, the carefully constructed image of athletic superiority collapsing like a house of cards. Zaden felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. For all his arrogance, Bryce was also a victim of his father's ambition, of a system that valued winning above integrity, of expectations he could never truly fulfill on his own. But sympathy didn't erase accountability. What Bryce and his teammates had done, the mockery, the sabotage, the deliberate attempts to exclude and humiliate, those choices had been theirs to make. As security escorted Bryce away, Zaden turned, back to his family, to Celeste, to the medical staff still attending to his injuries. The outside world with its dramas and revelations could wait. For now, he wanted only this: the simple joy of achievement shared with those who had believed in him when no one else would. On a small hill overlooking the finish area, away from the crowds and cameras, Mr. Larkin stood alone. He had pushed his aging body to its limits to reach this vantage point, determined to witness the culmination of his protégé's journey. As Zaden disappeared into the medical tent, surrounded by his family, the old man raised his hand in a silent salute, a gesture unseen by its intended recipient, but no less meaningful for that. Then, with a satisfied nod, James Larkin turned and walked away, disappearing into the swelling crowd of spectators. His part in this story was complete. What would come next belonged to Zaden alone. 3 months after the marathon, Zaden sat in Principal Foster's office, listening as the woman outlined the latest scholarship offer to arrive on her desk. "Stanford is very interested," she said, shuffling through the paperwork. "Full athletic scholarship, special academic support, housing stipend." She looked up at him over her reading glasses. "That makes 17 offers so far. You'll need to start narrowing them down soon." Zaden nodded politely, but his mind was elsewhere. The avalanche of offers had begun days after the race and hadn't slowed since. Every major college program wanted the runner who had captured the nation's imagination. Endorsement deals had followed, all carefully managed by a pro bono lawyer, who had reached out after seeing Zaden's story on the news. "Thank you, Ms. Foster," he said when she finished. "I'll add it to the list." Outside the office, Celeste waited, her sketchbook open on her lap. The drawing that had gone viral during the race, Zaden soaring past a line of birds, had opened doors for her as well. A major sports magazine had purchased the rights to use it as their cover, and she'd been offered an art scholarship to several prestigious programs. "Stanford now too?" she asked as Zaden emerged. "Yeah," he replied, adjusting the strap of his new backpack, one of many gifts that had arrived in the weeks following his victory. "But I'm thinking of turning them all down." Celeste's eyebrows shot up. "Are you serious? These are once-in-a-lifetime opportunities, Zaden." "I know," he said as they walked through the school hallway, a very different experience now that everyone knew his name. "But I've been thinking about something else." Later that afternoon, Zaden presented his idea to a small gathering at the Veterans Center. Mr. Larkin sat front and center, his expression thoughtful as Zaden outlined his plan. "I want to start a youth running program," Zaden explained, standing before the assembled veterans, his mother, Mia, and a few local community leaders who had been invited, "right here in our neighborhood, free for any kid who wants to join." He gestured to the presentation board behind him, where Celeste had helped him mock up a logo and mission statement. "The scholarship money can cover equipment, proper shoes, training gear," he continued, "and I was hoping some of you might volunteer as mentors." He looked directly at Mr. Larkin. "Show these kids what you showed me." The response was immediate and enthusiastic. Veterans volunteered time and expertise. A local business owner offered space for indoor training during bad weather. A doctor from the community clinic proposed free physicals for all participants. As the meeting broke up and people gathered in excited conversation, Mr. Larkin approached Zaden quietly. "You sure about this?" the old man asked. "Those colleges could take you places most people only dream about." Zaden nodded. "I'm sure. College will still be there in a year or two. But right now, there are kids out there like me, with talent and heart, but no way to show it. They need this more than I need Stanford." Mr. Larkin's eyes glistened with unshed tears. He placed a hand on Zaden's shoulder, squeezing gently. "Your legs might have won that race, son, but it's your heart that's going to change the world." On a bright spring morning, city officials gathered at the marathon finish line for a dedication ceremony. A small bronze plaque was unveiled, embedded in the pavement where Zaden had crossed the tape. Its simple inscription read, "Zayden Tucker, the boy they told to get out of the way." The ceremony was brief, but well attended. Local news stations covered it as a heartwarming follow-up to the story that had captivated the city months earlier. What they didn't cover, what most people didn't know, was that the plaque had been paid for by an anonymous donation from Tyler Matthews, the Westmont runner who had finished second. In the aftermath of the race and the subsequent investigations, the Westmont prep running program had been disbanded. Scott and several others had been disqualified, their records erased. Bryce and his father had disappeared from public view, reportedly moving to another state to escape the ongoing legal troubles and public scrutiny. But Tyler had stayed. He had publicly apologized for his team's behavior, acknowledged the advantages he had unfairly received, and asked to be stripped of his silver medal. When race officials declined, he had given the medal to a children's hospital auction, raising thousands for their pediatric asthma program. It was a small gesture of atonement, but it spoke to a larger change taking place in the community, a teamite reckoning with systems of privilege and exclusion that had gone unchallenged for too long. The running club that had once rejected Zaden now displayed his picture prominently in their training hall, renamed the Zayden Tucker Youth Development Center. The irony wasn't lost on anyone, but Zaden had accepted their overtures with grace, recognizing that genuine change often began with symbolic gestures before deeper transformation could take root. What mattered more to him was the impact of his victory on his own neighborhood. Every morning, young runners gathered at the abandoned track where he had trained with Mr. Larkin. Kids who looked like him, black and brown children from working-class families, arriving before dawn, lacing up donated running shoes, ready to discover their own potential. Among them was a core group of dedicated young athletes who showed particular promise. Zaden worked with them personally, passing on the wisdom Mr. Larkin had shared with him, adding his own insights about perseverance and self-belief. 6 months after the marathon, a solemn gathering assembled at Riverside Cemetery. James Larkin had passed peacefully in his sleep, his heart simply stopping after 87 years of stubborn, determined beating. Zaden stood before the assembled mourners, fellow veterans, community members, and a group of young runners from his program. His voice was steady despite the grief that threatened to overwhelm him. "Mr. Larkin taught me to run toward the life they said I couldn't have," he said, looking out at the faces watching him. He couldn't change the past, the opportunities that were stolen from him because of who he was, but he made sure that story wouldn't repeat itself with me. He paused, gathering himself. "I thought he was just teaching me how to run faster, but what he really taught me was how to stand taller, how to see beyond limitations, how to believe in possibilities that everyone else called impossible." After the service, a representative from a major athletic shoe company approached Zaden discreetly. They had been pursuing him for an endorsement deal since the race, offering increasingly generous terms. Today, their offer had changed. "We understand your reluctance to sign a personal deal," the woman explained. "But what if the sponsorship covered your entire youth program? 500 pairs of running shoes, training gear, competition entry, fees, all provided free of charge." Zaden considered the offer carefully, remembering his own worn-out shoes, the blisters and pain from inadequate equipment. "And what would you want in return?" "Your guidance on a new initiative," she replied. "We're developing a community athletics program nationwide. Your story, your approach, it could be the model." Rather than signing immediately, Zaden asked for time to consult with his mother, with the program participants, with the community that had supported him. This wasn't just his decision to make anymore. The scholarship money from the marathon had been put to immediate use. Mia's advanced treatments had begun, addressing not just her symptoms, but the underlying causes of her asthma. Within months, the improvement was remarkable. On a clear autumn morning, Zaden stood at the base of the cliff where he had watched so many sunrises alone. But today, he wasn't alone. Mia sat on his shoulders, her arms wrapped loosely around his neck, her breathing easy and regular. "Ready?" he asked, looking up at her. She nodded eagerly, and Zaden began to run, not his fastest pace, but steady and strong, carrying his sister up the winding path to the summit. When they reached the top, the sun was just cresting the horizon, painting the sky in familiar strokes of gold and pink. Zaden lifted Mia down, and they stood side by side watching the new day begin. Her hand found his, small fingers interlacing with his larger ones. "Is this where you used to come?" she asked, her voice full of wonder at the expansive view. "Every morning," Zaden confirmed, "to remind myself there was more out there than what we could see from our window." Mia considered this, her face thoughtful beyond her years. "And now other kids come here too?" Zaden nodded. "Now everyone can see it." 1 year after Zaden's victory, a new junior marathon was held. The course was the same, but everything else had changed. The registration requirements had been completely overhauled, with spots reserved for independent runners from underserved communities. Financial assistance was available for equipment and training. Race officials had undergone bias training. At the starting line, a remarkable sight greeted the spectators and media. Dozens of young black and brown runners stood shoulder to shoulder with their more privileged counterparts, all wearing proper gear, all properly trained, all equally determined. In the crowd, a voice called out, perhaps in ignorance, perhaps in deliberate provocation, "Get out of the way!" But this time the young runners didn't flinch or step aside. They smiled at each other knowingly, because they understood what that voice did not, that the way forward had already been cleared for them by a boy who had refused to stay in his place. And now it was their turn to run. Have you ever wondered what heights we might reach if the world didn't tell some of us to get out of the way? Perhaps Zaden's story lives in someone you've overlooked today. Like and subscribe for more stories that make us question who we allow to cross the finish line.